So I played the first Bioshock and its remastered versions back to back a while ago. I've played them a couple times in the past, first time when the original was released in 2007 on Xbox 360. Game has actually been released as original and remastered now on Windows, Xbox 360, PS3, Mac and Switch. By now I assume most people know what kind of a game Bioshock is, but if not, don't worry, I'm going to talk about the gameplay, graphics, reception and plot in this review. Plot is something I will talk in the end, and I will let you know when plot talk starts. Minor spoilers might be included while talking other stuff about it. I also played Bioshock 2, Bioshock Infinite with the 2 necessary DLCs for the story, and I have to say it makes me appreciate the story of the whole trilogy much more, playing them again. Infinite wraps the trilogy in such a good way that I really enjoyed it. Before I start, I want to talk shortly about the difference between original and remastered versions. Bioshock Remastered is an updated version of the original Bioshock game released in 2016 for PC, Xbox One and PlayStation 4. I do think there's a Switch version too, but I am not sure. The remastered version features an updated graphics, improved lighting and textures, and support for higher resolutions and frame rates, which though doesn't always look better, but the game also runs at higher frame rate, which makes the gameplay feel smoother and more responsive. Another difference between the two versions of the game is the addition of new gameplay features and quality of life improvements in the remastered version. For example, players can now use quick save features to save the progress at any time, and there are additional graphic settings allowing players to customize the look to their liking. For example, field of view was an extremely good improvement. Overall, while the original Bioshock is still classic and enjoyable game to play, the remastered version offers more technically impressive and polished gameplay experience. If you're a fan of the series or interested in playing the game for the first time, the remastered version is the recommended way for me to experience Bioshock, mainly due to the original being so taped together as a feeling. So let's talk about the gameplay. Bioshock is a first-person shooter that incorporates elements of role-playing games and some would say survival horror, though I disagree with this. There are ammunition collecting and such reserving, but mostly no. The players use a variety of weapons set in fictional 1960s world and plasmids, which are genetic enhancements that let you shoot, for example, lightning to stun enemies and set them on flames, to fight off enemies and explore environment. The game has very black and white moral choice system, which is extremely simple to select if you want good or a bad ending. I enjoyed the gun variation and upgrades in Bioshock, however it's a shame that many of the plasmids seem worthless. While the game does offer a variety of plasmids that can be used to approach combat and exploration in different ways, some players may find themselves sticking to a few that work well in most situations. For example, insect swarm seems pointless to distract enemies when you can set them in flames or shock with electricity to distract them out of their lives. There is a huge variety of plasmids and gene modification in Bioshock 1, though, so if you really want to play a certain way, it definitely lets you do that, although it's less than optimal most of the time. Offering wide range of weapons that are each distinct in their design and use, from the standard pistol to more exotic chemical thrower, which is basically a flamethrower with ice and electricity options, which by the way all of the guns have very useful alternative ammunitions. You have a lot of options when it comes to taking down enemies. Additionally, the upgrades for each weapon add another layer of customization, allowing players to tailor their arsenal to their preferred playstyle. The alternative ammunition and camera to research enemies to be able to make extra damage and learn new plasmids like camouflage, which lets you become invisible if you stand still, are interesting, and in the end additions that I did like as running out of certain special ammunition and having to change either ammo or weapon completely does make a nice and tight situations in the game. There are clearly best and worst weapons in the game, though you can affect this by changing your build overall between plasmids, gene tonics and regular terms passive in regular terms passive perks changes and ammunition. One of the strengths of Bioshock is its immersive world building, and that is just the thing that made me enjoy the game, even though I played it 2 times in a row as original and remastered it. It was every time fascinating, as every time you notice small details here and there more. This extends to the gameplay mechanics as well. The plasmids and the genes that players can acquire are all tied to the lore and history of Rapture, giving them sense of context and meaning within the game world. This attention to detail adds to the overall experience and makes the game world feel more believable in so many ways that I can't explain it in words. It's just a great feeling to play this game. Overall, while it's a shame that some of the plasmids may not be as useful as others, Bioshock's gun variation and upgrades add a lot of gameplay and help to make the combat feel engaging and varied. And even those pointless plasmids fit the world story-wise, although you might never use them. Each weapon has its unique strengths and weaknesses, making them useful in different situations. Some have armor-piercing ammo, ability to set everyone aflame under a second, or a shock with shots. Then there are powerful combos like the game teaches at the very beginning. Shock an enemy and hit them to the head with a wrench is extremely powerful and often one-hit combo on simple enemies. Another examples would be the incinerate plasmid to set enemies on fire and then finish them off with a shotgun blast. The cyclone trap plasmid can be used to create vortexes that pulls enemies towards it, allowing players to take them down with a grenade or another explosive weapon when they are extremely still. Of course, as I've played games a lot, min-maxing is easy to notice in this kind of game. It has some very hard edges on balancing. The best weapons seem to be pistol and Tommy gun, because they are basically hit scan weapons. Tommy gun doesn't even need a recoil reduction upgrade, as you can just tap the Tommy gun as fast as it shoots, and by not holding it down the recoil doesn't affect you, so you can just use it as a machine gun without recoil. Pistol can also be shot as fast as you can by tapping the finger, and it just becomes overpowered. Bioshock features a decent variety of enemies, although some players may find that there is a bit of repetition in types of enemies they encounter throughout the game. The most common enemy type in Bioshock are the Blicers, mutated humans who have become addicted to Adam, a genetic material that grants special abilities. There are several types of splicers, each with their own unique abilities and behavior, such as melee-focused Ducky splicers, the agile Houdini splicers, and the long-range Nitro splicers. Another common enemy type are the Big Daddies, massively heavily armored beings who are tasked with protection of the Little Sisters, young girls who harvest Adam from corpses. There are several types of Big Daddies, each with their own unique abilities and weapons, such as melee-focused Bouncer and the long-range Rosie. Other enemies in the game include security cameras and turrets, as well as the game's final boss, which I'm not going to talk about. Overall, while the Bioshock's enemy variety is not necessarily the most diverse, like there's only a handful of enemies, it's diverse enough and keeps the game like it fits again with the game's lore. The different types of enemies do provide some variety in gameplay and keep things interested. as the players progress through the game. And with the enemies, also the research and camera that you use, it wouldn't fit the game if there would be a larger variety of enemies. I think that would become extremely tedious to track on what enemies you have photographed and whatnot. Let's talk about the reception a little bit, because Bioshock is generally considered a highly acclaimed and influential game. It's not without its flaws. I gathered some complaints actually people had with the game. I might not completely agree with these, but I understand these examples to a certain degree. Repetitive gameplay. Some players have criticized Bioshock's gameplay as repetitive, with a limited range of enemies and environments. And this comes back to the enemies category I just talked about. Like it's handful of enemies, and if you don't use the research camera and such, it definitely feels like there's no reason not to have more enemy types. But then again, if there would be some monsters or mutations and such, it would break the game's mode a little bit more. Second complaint was limited use of plasmids. While plasmids are a unique and interesting aspect of Bioshock, some players criticize the limited use of them, like I said, like the bee swarm. Like it just some plasmids are more useful than others, and players may end up relying on the same few plasmids throughout the game. And this is 100% true. Like it's just, I don't think there's anyone who argues with this. Uneven difficulty. Bioshock's difficulty can be uneven at times, with certain sections of the game feeling much harder or easier than others. I personally thought the game was never too hard, as the life chamber system makes it pretty much impossible to fail, as when you die you will be revived the closest chamber to your current location. If you turn this setting off from the game menu, I can see the issue, but with playing the original and remastered, I only died once in the original, and that was mainly due to the lack of proper mouse and keyboard control. Controls on the original port are quite poor if you're not using a controller pad, as the mouse movement is extremely Xbox 360 and PS3 era PC port feeling, if you know what I mean. Basically feeling like there's a lot of dead zone and stuttering when you are moving your mouse. Remastered version fixed this issue completely, and popping heads was easy as ever. Limited exploration. While Bioshock's world of Rapture is immersive and engaging, some players criticize the limitation exploring opportunities. The game is fairly linear, and players may not have the freedom to explore as much as they would like. The game is definitely more on the linear side, with a very limited amount of exploration, but I think this helps with the story to be told in a more cohesive way. Technical issues. Like any game, Bioshock is not immune to technical issues. Some players reported issues with the game's performance, including lag crashes and other glitches. I do remember on the Xbox 360 I had constantly crash, like the game crashed constantly, and it was so frustrating. But the game was so good that I still played it through. Overall, while these issues may detract from the overall experience of playing Bioshock for some players, many still consider it to be highly enjoyable and groundbreaking game that paved the way for future immersive sims and first-person shooters. Crashing is something that causes me again almost to quit, especially in the original one, but even during the end of the remastered it started crashing, so I just quick saved after everything I did. Like every corner I took, every enemy mob group I killed, I quick saved, and it did became frustrating certainly. When Bioshock was first released in 2007, its graphics were considered highly impressive and significant improvement over other games at the time. The game's art style, which combined 1960s and 1950s aesthetics with horror and sci-fi elements create a unique and memorable atmosphere that still holds up today. The game's use of lightning and shadow along with the detailed textures and models help to create a dark and foreboding atmosphere in the underwater city of Rapture. The use of color and contrast also adds the game's visual appeal and helps to highlight the key features of the element. One of the key features on Bioshock 1's graphics is the use of water effects. As the game is set in an underwater city, water is constant presence and is used to create great effect, and its game's visuals without the water would be nothing special. The water is realistically rendered with waves, reflections and distortion effects, which create a sense of immersion and reality. Of course, to this date, these effects have a little bit, let's just say, become less realistic, and but they are still, like, overall the whole art style holds up extremely well, and the water effects just fit that 2007 era of game releases. The character models in Bioshock 1 are quite highly detailed with intricate facial animation and realistic movements. The enemies in the game are particularly memorable with grotesque and disturbing designs that add to the game's horror element and tell again a huge amount of the story that why these certain peoples are still alive in this underwater city. However, by today's standards, Bioshock graphics may not be as impressive as they once were, while the game's art style and atmosphere still hold up well. Some players may find the graphics to be somewhat dated or lacking in detail compared to most recent games, of course. On the other hand, I absolutely loved the visuals in the game, and playing it on 4K was a blast even today. It looks so good. It's one of those games that I don't think a remake would do it any good, as the original holds up so well in its style. That being said, it's worth noting that Bioshock graphics are not the most important aspect of the game. The game's storytelling, engaging gameplay and immersive world building are what have made it the classic and influential game that it is. Okay, so let's talk about the story. It's extremely central part of what makes the game such a beloved classic. It takes place in an underwater city of Rapture, a once thriving metropolis built by visionary entrepreneur Andrew Ryan. Ryan designed Rapture as a utopian society free from governmental regulations and the limitations of traditional morality. The city was meant to be a place where the most brilliant minds of humanity could gather to pursue and work free from the constraint of society. However, things have gone horribly wrong in Rapture, as you would assume, and the city has descended into chaos and violence, most people dead. As the player, you take the role of Jack, a man who finds himself stranded in Rapture after a plane crash. Jack quickly becomes embroiled in this conflict between various factions with Rapture, including the mad scientist Dr. Steinman, the ruthless businessman Sander Cohen, and the mysterious figure known as the Atlas. As Jack explores the city and uncovers the secrets of Rapture's past, he learns the truth about the origins of the city and the forces that have brought it to its current state. Along the way, he must confront the dangerous splicers and big daddies that inhabit the city, as well as the powerful figure known as Andrew Ryan. The story of Bioshock is both engaging and thought-provoking, exploring themes of power, morality, and limits of human nature. The game's revelations keep players on the edge of their seats, and the game's ending is widely regarded as one of the most memorable in video games. Though I do not think the ending in this game is what makes the story. This game's story is more about the journey to there. Because I personally did enjoy the ending. I think it's extremely well made ending, but it's just the path to get there is what made the story so good. The game uses a combination of gameplay, audio logs, and environmental storytelling to tell its story. As the player explores the city of Rapture, they will encounter various environmental clues that hint at the events that have taken place in the city. These may include bloodstains, graffiti, and abandoned objects that help to flesh out the game's world and characters. For example, as the player progresses through the medical pavilion area, they will encounter various signs of chaos and decay, such as bloodstained walls and overturned medical equipment. These environmental details help to convey the sense of desperation and the decay that has overtaken Rapture. In addition to environmental storytelling, these audio logs contain recordings of conversations between the characters' diary entries and other information of the life in Rapture. There's a couple of NPCs you interact with the game, and not all of them are in that good of a mindset anymore. But with flashbacks from those NPCs and talking with these people underwater, world is made much more interesting. Overall, Bioshock's story is told in a way that is both immersive and engaging, drawing players into the world of Rapture and keeping them invested in the game, its characters and narrative. The game's use of environmental storytelling, audio logs, and visual storytelling all work together to create rich and detailed world that players will want to explore and uncover the secrets of. Continuing the Bioshock review with Bioshock 2, I had similar experience with it playing it during the release on Xbox 360 at 2010. Originally, so the question is, how does it hold up, and is the remastered version better? I played the original and remastered back to back for this review. It was released for Microsoft Windows, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in February 2010. Bioshock Remastered was released on September 13, 2016 as a part of Bioshock the Collection, which included remastered versions of Bioshock 1, 2 and original version of Bioshock Infinite, as well as the single-player downloadable content. I'm going to talk about the gameplay, graphics, reception, and plot in this review. Plot is something I will talk in the end and will let you know when the plot talk starts. Minor spoilers might be included while talking on other stuff about it. I also played Bioshock 1 and Bioshock Infinite with the two necessary DLCs for the story, and I have to say it makes me appreciate the story of a whole trilogy so much more. Infinite wraps the trilogy in such a good way. Before I start, I want to talk shortly about the differences between original and remastered versions. Bioshock 2 Remastered features several notable differences from the original game. The remastered version includes updated graphics with higher resolution, textures, improved lighting, which though doesn't always look better, but they are technically better. But the game also runs at higher frame rate, which makes the gameplay feel so much smoother and more responsive. Various bug fixes are also included to address issues that were present in the original game. The remastered version also included all the single-player DLC that was released for the Bioshock 2, such as the Minerva's Den and Protector Trials DLC. Finally, the remastered version supports modern controllers like the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 controllers, which was not available for the original game. Overall, Bioshock 2 Remastered offers a most polished and modernized experience of Bioshock 2 versions. If you're a fan of the series or interested in playing the game for the first time, the remastered version is the recommended way to experience Bioshock from me, mainly due to the original being so taped together like with the Bioshock 1 too. Bioshock 2 is a first-person shooter just like the original one, with some role-playing elements. The gameplay involves exploration, combat, and puzzle solving as the player navigates through the dystopian underwater city of Rapture. As Big Daddy, The player has access to more powerful weapons and plasmids, which are genetically engineered abilities that can be used to manipulate environment or attack enemies. The player also gathers resources such as ammunition, health, and EVE, which is basically mana. It's used to power the plasmids by looting corpses, vending machines, and other objects found throughout the game. One unique feature of Bioshock 2 is the ability to adopt and protect little sisters, young girls who have been genetically modified to collect valuable substance called Adam, which is used for the plasmids and gene manipulation. The players can choose to harvest Adam from the little sisters, killing them in the process, or they can choose to rescue them, which will reward the player with a smaller amount of Adam but spare the little sister's life. The game has very black and white moral choice system, which is extremely simple to select if you want a good or a bad ending. Bioshock 2 has a diverse selection of guns that the players can use to take down enemies in the game. These guns range from conveniential firearms to more unique weapons that are specific to game's setting in the underwater city of Rapture. For example, the rivet gun is a powerful weapon that fires rivets, which can be used to impale enemies. Additionally, players can choose to use classic weapons such as the shotgun, which is now a double-barrel one, a fully automatic machine gun, which is now basically a Gatling gun, or the grenade launcher, which is now more of a rocket launcher. Unique weapons like the spear gun, a harpoon gun that fires different kind of bolts, as an example, explosive bolts, add even more variety to the gameplay experience. Each gun in Bioshock 2 has its own strengths and weaknesses, and players can choose which weapons they prefer based on their playstyle and the situation they are in. Moreover, the players can upgrade their weapons throughout the game using the game's currency, which can increase their effectiveness. Weapons are more balanced this time around, but they're still clearly best ones compared to a couple others. Bioshock 2 introduces same old plasmids with small changes to the original, just like the weapon system. Players wide variety to plasmids, which are genetically engineered abilities that can be used to attack enemies or manipulate the environment. Plasmids can be found scattered throughout the Rapture and can also be purchased from vending machines using the game's currency. The plasmids in Bioshock 2 are divided into two categories, combat and non-combat. Combat plasmids include abilities such as Incinerate, which allows the player to shoot fireballs at enemies, and Cyclone Trap, which creates vortex of energy that can knock enemies off their feet. These are very few plasmids that you can combine also, like Cyclone Trap, you can create a fire trap. Non-combat plasmids, on the other hand, include abilities such as Telekinesis, which allows the player to pick up and throw objects, and Insect Zone, which sends swarm of bees to attack enemies. Upgrading a plasmid can provide variety of benefits, such as increased damage, longer duration, or reduced cost to use. Overall, the plasmids in Bioshock 2 are an essential part of the gameplay experience, offering a wide variety of combat and non-combat abilities that can be used to approach challenges in a variety of ways. With ability to combine and upgrade plasmids, players have a lot of flexibility on how they choose to play the game. One of the strengths of Bioshock are again immersive world building and how it extends the gameplay mechanism as well. The plasmids and genes that players can acquire are all tied to the lore and history of Rapture, giving them a sense of context and meaning within the game world. This attention to detail adds to the overall experience and makes the game world feel more believable. Enemies. The most common enemies are again the Splicer, genetically enhanced humans who have become addicted to Adam, the substance that powers plasmids. There are several types of Splicers in the game, each with unique abilities and weaknesses. For example, Turkish splicers are strong but slow, while spider splicers are agile and can crawl on walls and ceilings and throw shit at you. Another common enemy in Bioshock 2 is the Big Sister, powerful enemies that are responsible for protecting the Little Sisters. Big Sisters are fast and agile and can use plasmids to attack players. Interestingly, the Big Sisters are also grown up earlier versions of the Little Sisters. They are particularly challenging to defeat, and the player will encounter them at several points throughout the game. Also, some old robotics like flying turrets, ground turrets and security cameras appear again. There are a couple boss battles which pit the player against particularly powerful enemies. These boss battles can be quite challenging if you haven't explored around, but if you have upgraded your weapons and health, you do feel like a big daddy against an ant farm. If I recall correctly, there is no boss, like individual boss battles, like the last boss of Bioshock 1, but there are boss arenas, I would say. Reception. When the game was released originally, many reviewers praised the game's immersive atmosphere, compelling storyline and engaging gameplay. The ability to play as Big Daddy was also seen as a welcome addition, as it allowed players to experience Rapture from a new perspective. The game's graphics and sound design were also highly praised, with many critics noting that the attention to detail is improved since the first game to create a Rapture more believable. However, some reviewers felt that the game didn't quite live up to the high standards set by the original Bioshock. Some criticized the game's pacing, which they felt was slower than the first game. Others felt that the game's story wasn't as compelling as the original, and that the game relied too heavily on nostalgia for the predecessor. Overall, Bioshock 2 was generally well received by critics and has since become a beloved entry in the Bioshock series. Its engaging gameplay and immersive atmosphere and strong storyline have made it a favorite among the fans of the series, and it remains a popular game among the gamers to this date. Crashing is something that causes me almost to quit the second game too. More in the original version, but even during the end of Remastered, it again started to crash. So quick saving became an essential every minute or two, so I wouldn't have to replay every section multiple times. Graphics in the Bioshock 2 features several improvements to the graphics and visual presentation of the game compared to its predecessor. These improvements help to create more immersive and atmospheric game world, making it feel more realistic and detailed. One of the most notable improvements is the lighting effect. Bioshock 2 features improved lighting which adds to the game's atmosphere greatly. The lighting effects are particularly impressive when exploring the underwater city of Rapture in places that are dark and overflown. The use of shadows and lights creates a sense of tension and fear, making the game's environment feel more dangerous and unpredictable. Another improvement is the textures of the game. The game's textures have been updated and improved in many ways, making the world of Rapture feel more detailed while the game working smoother. This is particularly noticeable in close-up shots of objects or characters with the camera, where they appear more detailed and polished. This makes the game feel more immersive and helps the players to connect with the game world. The underwater effects in Bioshock 2 are also impressive, as always. As the game is set in the underwater city, it features a lot of water effects, bubbles, currents, reflections. These effects are well executed and add to the game's realism, helping to create the feeling of being submerged in an underwater city. Overall, Bioshock 2 graphics are improvement over the first game. The attention to detail and improved lighting, textures and underwater effects all add to the atmosphere and keep you invested to the game world. And even to this date, the graphics hold up great because it is a little bit stylized and instead of fully realistic, and that always makes the games last so much better. I will be now talking about the story of the game. The story in Bioshock 2 is primarily told through the combination of traditional cutscenes, audio recordings, and environmental storytelling. Environmental storytelling is also an important aspect of the game's narrative. Story is also conveyed through the game's mechanism, particularly the player's interaction with Little Sisters and the other NPCs that are connected to this plot. How players choose to treat the Little Sisters, either rescuing them or harvesting them for Adam, will have significant impact on the outcome. The game begins with the player character subject Delta being revived by a Little Sister in a white chamber. The game then flashes back to Delta's past as a Big Daddy, specifically his connection to the little sister named Eleanor. Delta was paired with Eleanor as his little sister shortly after her birth, and the two developed a strong bond. Fast forward to the present day, and Delta wakes up in the underwater city of Rapture to find that things have changed. The city is now under control of Sophia Lamb, a political leader who has established a new ideology called the family that emphasizes selflessness and greater good for the community over individualism. God damn, individualism. Delta discovers that Eleanor has been taken by Lamb, who has plans to use her for her own purposes. Delta is driven by his connection to Eleanor and his desire to rescue her, and sets out on a mission to find her and to stop Lamb's plan. As Delta explores Rapture, he encounters various characters, some of whom are his enemies and others who have become his allies. Among his enemies are splicers, the deranged inhabitants that I mentioned earlier, who are basically Adam addicts, the substance that grants superhuman abilities in the Bioshock universe. Delta must also face other Big Daddies, who are now controlled by Lamb and her followers. Among Delta's allies are other characters who share his desire to defeat Lamb and rescue Eleanor. These include Grace Holloway, a former singer who is now leading the opposition against Lamb, and Augustus Sinclair, a businessman who runs the company that specializes in supplying resources and equipment to those who are fighting against Lamb. As Delta progresses through the game, he learns more about the history of Rapture, including the role that Sophia Lamb and her family played in the city's downfall. He also uncovers more about his own past and his connection to Eleanor. In the game's climatic final, Delta faces off against Lamb and her followers with Eleanor, and it's a big, like I said, there are no certain boss fights, but it's a big arena where you fight with a big sister as who is Eleanor, now a teenager. Your baby girl has now turned a teenager over the 10 years of being in a coma, and it's a Big Daddy and Big Sister versus the world. Continuing the Bioshock review with Bioshock Infinite. Again, I played it first time during the release on Xbox 360 at 2013. Originally, there's not really remaster of this one, but it has been released with Bioshock Complete Package to many modern consoles. Developed by Irrational Games and published by 2K Games, it was released 2013 for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and later for Mac OS and Linux. The game is set in the 1912 and follows the story of Booker DeWitt, a former Pinkerton detective who is sent to the floating city of Columbia to find and rescue a young woman named Elizabeth. Plot is something I will talk in the end and will let you know when the plot talk starts. Minor spoilers might be included while talking other stuff about it. Infinite alone might not be that mind-blowing of an experience, but with the two single-player DLCs are necessary for the whole trilogy to wrap up. Like the previous games in the series, players explore a complex, intricate world filled with danger and mystery. In this case, the world is floating city of Columbia, a utopian society that's been torn apart by political and social unrest. Players must navigate the city's many areas, engaging in combat with various enemies, interacting with the environment, and collecting items and resources along the way. You play Booker DeWitt, who is sent to find the girl. Combat in Bioshock Infinite is more fast-paced. Players use variety of weapons to defeat enemies, although only being able to carry two at a time. They can also use Vigors, this game's plasmids, which are powers that grant them unique abilities such as telekinesis or the ability to create explosive traps. Skyhook, a grappling hook that allows them to quickly move around an environment, is added to gain that tactical advantage and finish off enemies. One of the key features in Bioshock Infinite's gameplay is Elizabeth, the young woman who players are sent to rescue. Elizabeth plays a crucial role in the game's story and her abilities also impact gameplay. She can open tears in reality, which can change the environment or summon useful items such as cover or turrets. She can also provide players with ammo or health during combat. In addition to combat, Bioshock Infinite features a number of RPG-style elements. Players can collect infusions, which can be used to increase their shield, health, and vigor powers. They can also collect gear, which is items that provide various passive bonuses such as increased damage or reduced damage taken. Overall, Bioshock Infinite's gameplay is a well-balanced mix of exploration, combat, and RPG elements that rewards players for creative thinking and strategic planning. Bioshock Infinite features a wide variety of guns that players can use to take on enemies in combat. Each weapon has its own unique strengths and weaknesses, and players can upgrade their weapons with various modifications found throughout the game. Some of the more traditional guns in the game include pistols, shotguns, and rifles. The pistols are fast and accurate, while the shotguns pack a powerful punch-up clause. The rifles, on the other hand, are most versatile, allowing players to engage enemies at medium or long range. There are also now more unique weapons, such as the hand cannon, a powerful revolver that can take out enemies with just well-placed shot, and the volley gun, a heavy weapon that launches a barrage of explosive rounds at enemies. Vigors add abilities to set enemies fire or ability to summon crows to attack enemies. These vigors can be upgraded over time to make them even more effective in combat. Overall, Bioshock Infinite offers players a wide variety of guns and abilities to choose from, allowing them to tailor their combat style to their individual preference. Whether players prefer to take stealthy approach or charge in guns blazing, there's weapon or vigor that will suit your playstyle. Vigors do work better than previous games' plasmids as the usage of them seems to be more balanced to me. So in this sense, it only comes to a personal preference, like how I love to use murder crows almost exclusively. One of the most unique aspects of combat in Bioshock Infinite is the use of Skyhook. Players can use it to quickly move around the environment, allowing them to quickly flank enemies or escape dangerous situations. They can also use it to perform skyline strikes, which are powerful most of the time, one-shot melee attacks that deal massive damage to enemies. Elizabeth can toss your ammunition, new guns, great turrets, or Skyhook places, and it pays the player for thinking fast. Enemies. The most common enemies in the game are Columbia citizens. These brainwashed citizens of Columbia will attack the player's site and can use a variety of weapons, just the same ones that the player can have access to. They are often encountered in groups and will work together to take down player. Motorized patriots are robotic enemies that are modeled after American historical figures such as George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. They carry heavy weapons and are resistant to damage, making them formidable foes. They can also summon shields to protect themselves and nearby enemies. Handymen are towering humanoid enemies that are heavily armored and difficult to defeat. They can jump long distances and deal massive amounts of damage with their fists. They are also resistant to many types of damage, making them formidable foes. There's also more unique enemy called Boys of Silence, which are blind enemies that use sound to detect player. They emit a high-pitched noise that can alert other enemies to the player's presence, making them a unique and challenging opponent. But these enemies you encounter only in one place of the game. Bioshock Infinite was generally well received by both critics and fans of the series, although opinions on its quality compared to other games in the series is extremely mixed. The game received numerous awards and nominations for its story, characters, and gameplay, with particular praise going to its intricate narrative and themes. The game's use of floating city of Columbia as a setting was also widely praised, with many critics noting the level of detail and creativity that went into the design. However, some fans of the series felt Bioshock Infinite diverged too far from the themes and gameplay mechanics of the previous games, and criticized its more linear structure and simplified combat system. Additionally, some critics felt that the game's ending was confusing and unsatisfying. Overall, while Bioshock Infinite may not have been universally hailed as the best entry in the series, it was still widely regarded as a well-crafted and enjoyable game that continued the legacy of the franchise. Infinite again hits me similarly like the first and second games in this series in the visual design. It also was praised for its stunning and immersive graphics during the release, which were a significant step up from previous games in the series. The game's art style was heavily influenced by the aesthetics of 20th century, particularly architecture, fashion, and Art Deco and American Renaissance periods. This gave the game a unique and striking look that was distinct from other first-person shooters on the market at that time, and I don't think there is another game that captures the Bioshock Infinite look to this date. In addition to its art style, Bioshock Infinite featured improved technical graphics, including detailed character models, realistic lighting and shadow effects, and high-quality textures. The game also made use of dynamic weather and environmental effects to further enhance its immersive world building, though these are extremely limited in this game, but they are there. Overall, Bioshock Infinite's graphics were widely praised by both fans and critics, with many reviewers noting that the game's visuals were some of the best in the industry at the time of its release. I will be now talking about the story of the game. In Bioshock Infinite, the concept of time loop is a crucial element of the story. The game begins with Booker DeWitt arriving in the floating city of Columbia, tasked with rescuing a young woman named Elizabeth from her captors. Along the way, he learns that Elizabeth has incredible powers to manipulate space and time, and that she has been held captive by the city's ruler, Zachary Comstock, who claims to be prophet of the Lord. As Booker and Elizabeth make their way through Columbia, they become embroiled in a conflict between the ruling class and the Vox Populi, a group of working-class citizens who seek to overthrow them. Booker also begins to uncover the web of conspiracies and alternative dimensions that threaten to destroy not just Columbia but the entire world. Eventually, it is revealed that Booker and Comstock are actually the same person, separated by different versions of reality. In one timeline, Booker refused to have his daughter, Anna, baptized and instead sold her to Comstock's reality as a way to pay off his gambling debts. This led Anna being taken to Columbia and renamed Elizabeth, where she was kept captive until Booker arrived to rescue her. As the two travel through Columbia and alternative realities, Elizabeth discovers that she has the power to open tears in reality and allowing her and Booker to travel between these different timelines and dimensions. They eventually learn that Comstock is actually the version of Booker who traveled to the parallel reality where he became a hero and founded Columbia, but also became increasingly fanatical and authoritarian. In the game's climatic final act, it's revealed that the true goal of Comstock and the ruling class of Columbia is to create a sacrifice that will allow them to continue their rule and maintain their reality. This sacrifice turns out to be Elizabeth, who is revealed to be a version of Anna who gained her powers as a result of traumatic experience in Columbia. In order to stop Comstock and save Elizabeth, Booker must travel to reality where he accepted the baptism and became a martyr in fight against Comstock. In this reality, he confronts a version of himself who has embraced his role as a hero and sacrificed himself to prevent Comstock from ever existing. The game's ending sequence shows a montage of different realities, suggesting that the events of the game have created a multiverse of infinite possibilities. The final scene shows Booker arriving at the scene that echoes the beginning of the game, suggesting that the cycle of events may be destined to repeat indefinitely. In addition to the main story, Bioshock Infinite also explores themes such as American exceptionalism, racism, and danger of nationalism and religious extremism. It also features memorable characters such as enigmatic Songbird and explores the complex relation between Booker and Elizabeth. Last part of my Bioshock reviews with the last parts of Bioshock story, Burial at Sea parts 1 and 2, where we actually return to Rapture in Bioshock Infinite, ending what we started in the first game and at the same time starting the whole game trilogy again. Part 1 being released on November 2013 and Part 2 in March 2014. These games take place at time before first Bioshock when Rapture was still working place. Part 1 features gameplay similar to that Bioshock Infinite, with focus on using variety of weapons and plasmids to fight off enemies. The expansion also introduces new stealth mechanics, allowing players to avoid combat and sneak past the enemies if they prefer. Burial at Sea Part 2 takes place after the events of Bioshock Infinite Part 1. With Elizabeth as the playable character, the game takes place in alternative timeline where Rapture has fallen and Elizabeth is working to escape the city and find a way to prevent the events of the previous games from occurring. The gameplay in Burial at Sea Part 1 is similar to that Bioshock Infinite, but with some new additions and tweaks. Players take control of Booker DeWitt, who is now a private investigator in Rapture. As in previous Bioshock games, players explore the city, collect resources, and engage in combat with various enemies. The story of Burial at Sea Part 1 is also tightly woven into the gameplay like with the original games. Players must investigate various areas of Rapture and gather clues to unravel the mystery of a missing girl named Sally. As they progress through the game, the players will encounter new characters and factions vying for the control of the city. Overall, Burial at Sea Part 1 offers a mix of familiar Bioshock gameplay mechanics with new additions of Infinite. The story Part 2 picks up where the Part 1 left off, with Elizabeth still on mission to save Sally. The main difference is that players control now Elizabeth rather than Booker DeWitt. This change in perspective also led to some gameplay changes. Part 2 is mainly built around stealth mechanics as Elizabeth is very poor at wielding basic weapons. She does have a silent crossbow and silent takedowns, very basic stealth game elements. I did find myself running past enemies a lot of time as they were slow to react many times, Elizabeth can also use Peeping Tom, a plasmid that makes her invisible and allows her to see through walls to avoid enemies to a greater degree. She can also distract enemies using noisemakers, which can be thrown to lure enemies away from her path. Burial at Sea Part 1 and 2 has mostly human enemies such as splicers from Bioshock 1 and 2, as well as robotic foes like security drones and turrets. The DLC also introduces the Big Daddy variant called Big Brother, which can be fought or avoided depending on players' preference. Part 1 gameplay is very much a mix of Bioshock 1 weapons with Infinite's gameplay. In Burial at Sea Part 2 the focus shifts to stealth, so there are fewer enemies overall, however the DLC still features splicers and security drones. I personally enjoyed both parts, though I'm usually not one to play DLCs, but Part 1 and Part 2 both received positive reviews for their engaging story. Critics praised the DLC's ability to tie together the narratives of Bioshock games, as well as its explorations of themes like choice and consequence. The addition of stealth mechanics in Part 2 was also seen as a welcome change of pace from the combat-heavy gameplay of the main games. However, some reviews criticized the DLCs for its short length and its reliance on nostalgia for the original Bioshock game. Others felt that the DLC focus on fanservice came at the expense of story's coherence. I have to say I disagree, and I do like both of these DLCs extremely much, but the stealth gameplay is shit. Like it's just not worth of stealthing around. The graphics in Burial at Sea were generally praised. They are a little bit more detailed and atmospheric in overall quality. Part 1 and Part 2 both featured the same high quality graphics as the main game, with detailed character models and intricate environments and stunning lighting effects. One of the standout features of the DLC's graphics was the attention paid to creating the authentic 1950s aesthetic, with periodic appropriate clothing, architecture and design elements. The underwater city of Rapture was once again brought to life in stunning detail, and the addition of new locations like the department store and the bathysphere station added to the game's overall visual appeal. The DLC also made use of some advanced graphical techniques seen in the main game, such as dynamic lighting, advanced water physics and particle effects. Overall, the graphics in Burial at Sea were seen a major highlight of the DLC, helping to immerse players in the world of Rapture and create memorable gaming experiences. I will be now talking about the story of the game. The story, Burial at Sea Part 1, or as it's named, Episode 1. The players take control of the private investigator Booker DeWitt once again, but this time in Rapture, the underwater city from the original Bioshock game. Booker is hired by a mysterious woman named Elizabeth to find a missing girl named Sally. The story takes place before the events of the first Bioshock game and explores the origins of Rapture and its downfall. Booker and Elizabeth arrive at the Garden of Muses, where they are encountered by Sander Cohen, a mad artist, who demands they dance for him to inspire his muse. After the dance, Cohen reveals that Sully is in a housewares building and can only be reached with the help of Old Man Winter Plasmid. Booker and Elizabeth battle their way through the department store and eventually find Sally, who has been turned into a little sister. As Booker tries to rescue Sally, he suddenly remembers that he is actually the version of Zachary Comstock, the main antagonist of Bioshock Infinite's main story. In a flashback, it is revealed that Comstock, along with the Luther's twins, took Booker's daughter Anna in an alternate universe, but accidentally killed her while trying to bring her to their world. Comstock then used a tear device to escape his past and start a new life as Booker DeWitt in Rapture. Elizabeth, enraged by Comstock's actions, does not forgive him and instead warns him that he will pay for what he has done. As they try to leave the building, the Big Daddy that Sully was bonded to attack them. In the chaos, the Big Daddy kills Comstock before Elizabeth's eyes and the screen fades to black, ending episode 1 and setting up the story of episode 2. In Burial at Sea, episode 2, Elizabeth wakes up in the toys section of Fontaine's housewares department after Atlas and his men take Sally away. Booker DeWitt's vision appears, coercing Elizabeth to claim she can help Atlas escape the sunken department store for the exchange of Sally's freedom. Elizabeth explores the store and finds her own dead body amongst the rubble. However, her powers allowed her to continue existing in some form in the multiverse, and her sense of guilt moved her to return to Rapture to clean up the mess. Elizabeth discovers that Dr. Yi Shoushong knew about Columbia and built a Lotus device connecting back to the Flying City. Elizabeth realized that she can use the Lotus particle that kept Columbia afloat to lift the department store back to Rapture. She collects equipment needed to repair the vandalized device with the reluctant help of Atlas and Shoushong. Elizabeth then travels through a tear back to Columbia, recovers the Lotus particle and returns to Rapture. Once back, she transports the hair sample to Shoushong, but comes face to face with Andrew Ryan through a video monitor. He sends her an ultimatum: either join forces with him or die at the hands of his private police. Elizabeth escapes and makes her way to Frank Fontaine's private office, bringing with her the Lotus particle to the top of sunken structure where the load-bearing columns meet. As she releases the particle and causes the building start rising, Atlas's men capture her, believing her to be more valuable than Sally. Elizabeth is overdosed with truth serum and wakes up 2 weeks later with a Rapture civil war in full swing. Atlas then tortures her by threatening to lobotomize her unless she tells him where the ace in the hole lies. Elizabeth recalls one future that she previously witnessed and tells Atlas that Ace is in Shoushong's hat. She retrieves Ace from the doctor's corpse and returns it to Atlas, knowing full well Atlas will betray her. Atlas is furious at the contents of the Ace, but in one last flash memory, Elizabeth finds herself aboard the plane, transported Jack to Rapture, and recognized the code's message as Jack's trigger phrase, "Would you kindly?" She translated the code and Atlas begins to form a plan for Jack to come to Rapture and kill Ryan. Then fatally strikes Elizabeth again, leaving her alone with Sally, honoring his part of the deal. As Elizabeth succumbs into her wounds, she has one last vision of the future, revealing that Jack will be the one to end the cycle of violence in Rapture and save Sally and the other little sisters. And this is how the trilogy ends and begins, endlessly. This is, in my opinion, this is a perfect example of a loop that is caused by time travel and multiple universes. And this, the end of part 2 for me was the highlight of the whole trilogy, including the DLC, of course. It just showing the ending of the first game again, the good ending where Jack is outside with the little sisters, saved Rapture, and knowing that Elizabeth created the war and caused so many people to die. And can we even blame Elizabeth for this? Because originally it's Booker's problem. But then again, Booker wouldn't have done this if Elizabeth wouldn't exist. Jack is a minor part of the trilogy, and it goes such a in-depth and one of the most well-written stories of time loops. I hope you enjoyed these reviews, and I thank you for watching.